You're listening to Japanese Baptist Church in Seattle, Washington.
All right. Welcome to a new episode of JBC Connect. I know it's been a while, but I think this is worth the wait. I got my good friend, Reverend Laura Ng, to join us, and extremely busy doing so many things, working with ABHMS, and then you're working on doctoral studies and I don't know, getting this new platform online, all this stuff. There's so much to talk about. So I want to just dive right into it. And I wanted to tell people that I wanted to actually do a conversation with Lauren for quite a while, especially in light of all the stuff that was happening with hate crimes towards the AAPI community. And there's all this stuff. And, as a pastor, Lauren, I feel like this pressure, what are you going to say? You need to say something really thoughtful. You've got to lead us forward. You've got to navigate. And honestly, it's exhausting because I want to process it myself. It's almost like I've got to kind of take care of others first before I can do my own thing. And so I thought I don't think I could do a conversation or a podcast, it was because it was just too close to home in so many ways. And I'll talk a bit about some of the stuff I was going through later. But you know what I thought was I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait a little bit till things settle. Cause that's kind of the personality I am. I need time to process. And I'm going to swing around and I'm going to try and find a good friend that I can just talk with and just freely talk about it. Not feel like we have to represent the entire AAPI community. I don't want to feel also we have to educate everyone about our personal context or anything like that. Cause both of us are in some ways, I'd say people would think oh, we're very quote stereotypical, whatever that means. But in other ways, I think we have very unique stories, both of us, very unconventional entry points into church and society. So I thought what, let's just kind of give ourselves a permission to kind of lay off all those shackles and let's just talk, So I thought it would be a nice way to start off today with just kind of freely talking about how you've been dealing personally with the attention of all this the AAPI community coming to the forefront, forefront recently, obviously concerning hate crimes, but for a lot of reasons, right? I think increased representation, just thinking on top of my head, Minari getting all these these votes, and just being recognized in the creative
Oscars.
circle. Yeah, it's nuts, right? So it's just a really interesting time to be a part of this community, right? So I was interested in how are you dealing with all this stuff personally and in ministry?
Yeah. I mean,
you don't have to
first of all, thanks for having me back. I always enjoy conversations with you, Sam, and certainly with the JVC family. So, and I love the idea of just having a kind of conversational, relaxed exchange, because I was just saying to you before we started recording that I have been joking to people close to me, saying things like, oh, okay, I'm ready for everyone to celebrate someone else's heritage because it has been such a busy month. And when I say busy, I mean, speaking engagements, writing articles, podcasts, having conversations, critical conversations, needed conversations, but also busy just because it's what's happening inside of us. It's an emotionally, spiritually busy time, even internally. So I make that joke. But at the same time, there's a sadness too around the reality that it took violent crime against hate crimes against the AAPI community for our voices and stories to be heard in unprecedented ways in this country. And I was mentioning to you too that I think a lot of theologians, creatives, people have been kind of working through that idea. So what happens on May 31st when the Heritage Month is over? What happens if, the hate crimes start to minimize or decease, cease to happen? I mean, that would be wonderful, but will the AAPI agenda and will our identities as a diverse community start to fade into the background? So there's just a lot going on. How I'm dealing with it personally, I mean, I think March 16th, 2021, when the murders happened in the Georgia, Atlanta area, I think that was sort of a kind of a flashpoint for me. I'd already been paying attention. I'd already been engaging in conversations about it. But something like really, I don't know, visceral happened to me, like bodily reaction occurred on that night. And it was a Tuesday night. I'm going to always remember that because I was in my demon class and my phone starts lighting up of people saying, oh my gosh, have you heard, news article? And my professor, who's an Asian man, Korean man, he called on me next to speak about something in the class. And I said, Dr. Park, I am so sorry, but if I need to share something. I have been distracted. I'm going to be honest. I've been distracted because my phone is going off. I'm getting the news about this. This has just happened. And he said, oh my gosh. And then of course, everyone in the class starts looking it up and we just are all exhaling. Out of the cohort of 10, 7 of us are Asian. Several of them are brothers from Myanmar, Burma. So we started to just like sigh and just kind of, remark about it. And then we wept and then we prayed. And then after class was over, I went upstairs. I was talking to my husband about it. And I started crying. A lot makes me cry these days. I'm in my 40s, who knows, perimenopause. I don't know what's going on, but everything makes me cry. Like, show me a Pixar Disney film, I'm in tears. Okay. So, but this was different. This was, I felt like I said to my husband I said, these women were targeted because they look like me, something that's unchangeable. I would never want to change it, but I'm also unable to change it. And the thought that somebody would go in and target people simply because they fit the type that I fit physically, was just abhorrent and really scary. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a huge deluge of emotion that kind of came out. And it was that night that a good friend of mine, African-American woman, texted me and said, tonight we weep, tomorrow we fight. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, what are we going to do? What am I going to do? Mm-hmm. Anyway, make a long story short, I called together a bunch of people locally and ended up hosting a Zoom 2 nights later on that Thursday night, March 18th, and 63 people showed up. Wow. And a lot of things have happened in our community. Things were already happening before I got engaged, but, having pulled people together, a lot has started to happen. So it was a great way for me to kind of channel some of my my grief and that trauma, the trauma of the experience, into some positive action. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. I'm really glad you brought that, because I was wondering if we should just use that incident in particular as kind of a turning point, because there was something about that, right, that just, I think, really released a lot of things for a lot of people, definitely for myself. And I think the grief is that we all kind of realized, the people I was talking to, and even just processing myself, is that we've been enduring this shame for a long time, just being tokenized, demeaned, objectified, and told somehow that we have to, the word in Korean is tamo, which is endure. In Japanese, it's gaman suru, is just bear it,
bear down.
Yeah,
deal.
and it's really toxic because it's in our culture, this kind of philosophy of just put your head down and just take it, because that's the higher virtue, right? And so I think something about that violent act, just so blatantly wrong, it just released all these years, why have we bought into this? Why have we let people treat us this way, and I think of myself, growing up as a very distinct minority, around a lot of a Ukrainian kind of community in Canada, in Edmonton, people just getting used to the fact that no one outside of my door understands who I am, and if I tell them who I am and where I come from, they'll make fun of it, so I just don't talk about it, and just realizing like all my childhood, like there's so much racism in it that, but I just like, this is life, and I just kind of grinned and, I just bear it, And I think there was something about that was just really, just triggering for all of us, it's like,
well, I think you use the phrase like, why have we allowed it for so long? And I guess that begs the question of, where does the culpability rest? I mean, is it our fault because we've been willing culturally or generationally, whatever, to bear it and just head down, just be quiet? Or is that, have we just been victims of, a white Euro, normative culture that has told us that we had no other options. And I think a lot of it is self-preservation, right? Like we hear, a lot of us have heard our elders say things like, just don't stir the pot. Like do it. And that's born out of an immigrant experience, of course, like a first generation immigrant experience of like, just don't cause anybody to pay attention to you, right, like whatever you have to do. Right. Yeah. Whatever you have to do to stay safe and preserve yourself. And our generation now gets to reap the benefits of that self-preservation, even though we could look at them and say, well, I wish you had been more forthright. I wish you had spoken up more. They were doing what was required of them in their time to be able to give, literally and figuratively, give birth to the next generation who then gets to decide for ourselves how vocal we want to be, what kind of presence we want to have in this country. And I think your daughter, my kids, their generation will have yet even more, hopefully, let's pray, progress to be made because of, the foundation that we have laid as their parents. I mean, I tell my kids all the time, like, it's so cool that you see people who look like you on the big screen. I mean, it's cool that when I was walking into a Rite Aid the other day and my daughter was picking out like an eyeliner and the model, like two of the, 5 models up there were Asian. And I was like, it just didn't used to be like that. Yeah. It just did, and I still notice it. I mean, it's one of those things that they don't notice it, thankfully. Yeah. It's normal for them. But for me, it's still kind of like a shock.
That's right. Right. Yeah. I want to just kind of interject here because like I want to make sure, because I'm really thankful you clarified that because
good. Yeah.
My wording, when I said like allow, you're right. Like that's what makes it so complicated is that it's been imposed on us, and we've been oppressed by this, but I feel like my generation being the second generation of immigration, like Korean, and this is where it gets complicated too, right? Because like every ethnicity has a different immigration history and length. A lot of different contexts, but like I feel like I didn't have the language to articulate like you're imposing something on me. Like I didn't have like the tools to like fight back or no, and it's only like I think now that we're kind of seeing like peers and other ethnic groups like mobilizing and just thinking systematically and strategically about like how to expose and attack racism, that we're finding things that are helping us too. And, we're like all coming together, and it's exciting to see like people of color rallying, but it's, I think we're all on a journey still. Right. And part of what happened with me with that week in particular was like 2 days later for me. So I'm an adjunct teacher at Seattle Pacific University, and I teach like a Christian Foundations class, and we go systematically through this book by Lisa Sharon Harper, like The Very Good Gospel, which is a great book, and it talks about like, what does God's shalom look like if we apply it to all the brokenness of the world? And I talk at length about white privilege and God's desire for shalom between the races, right? And in this final paper, there's a student who actually does really badly in the course because, and they didn't get a good mark. And so they wrote back to me like, this comment saying like, yeah, but you need a psychiatrist because you're obsessed with white privilege. I mean, like, this is like on the official, like, e-system, like he's writing this on like, it's on the network. Gosh. It's like official. And I was just like, so this is like 2 days after the shooting or something like that.
I mean, I don't know.
And then he dropped out.
I
don't know
how
much
much. Is he not a person of? Is he a person of color?
No, he's Caucasian, young,
Uh-huh.
white male. And I found out later when I reported him that he did this to another faculty of color. Wow. But you know, that day, like normally, like this is just like whatever. I mean, I get this all the time in my life, you know, like I feel, but something about that week, I was just like,
but that week,
I can't, you know, and I feel like I just shut down, honestly. Yeah. Like I was like, and I knew I had to preach about this like the following Sunday, like a couple of days later. And I feel like it was really like just an act of grace, like the Holy Spirit, just like, God, I really was like, God, I need you to speak through me. It was like, literally, I just like cobbled together some points and just speak.
Yeah. And
I got through it, but I just want to kind of share about like how I think that was such a turning point for all of us. And, you know, it's interesting, like when you mentioned kids, because like that's the first thing you turn to, right? Like we both have daughters. You know, my daughter's younger than yours, like she's 4, she just turned 4. But that's what you immediately turn to is like, well, what kind of world is she going to go into? Like, is she going to go into school with that? So you have this like tension of like, we're so broken. But then you mentioned that, you know, wonderful story about like going to see the eyeliner and like the posters. You realize like, in some ways, we're so much farther along, right? When I think of like what my dad endured, right? Like coming in as an immigrant to, you know, to Canada, completely white community. And I found out much later in life, like he endured a lot of intense racism in that town.
Sure.
But so we've gone so much farther than that, but at the same time, we're not far along. So I feel like there's this tension, right?
Well, I mean, in media and in advertising, it's like on one hand, you know, gosh, I mean, you could put anyone's face up there in perpetuity and it doesn't change systems per se.
Right.
But then it also has some influence and some effect as well. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, like, you know, during the year of COVID, we got all the TV. I mean, we didn't have any TV before this. We had like Apple TV. So you had to like buy a show or buy a movie if you wanted to watch it. That's how like anti-TV we were. Now we got the Hulu, we got the Netflix, we got Disney Plus, we got it all. So, and I'm watching during this month especially, but also during just over the past 14 months with or a year and a half or I should really say 5+ years since Trump was in presidency, of more AAPI, more people of color, but specifically, or maybe I'm just noticing it, more Asians, in like, you know, on like an Instacart commercial and like on a whatever, like a PG&E commercial. And my kids laugh because I always point it out. I'm like, oh, the Asian family. Oh, it's an Asian family, you know, but doing normal activities as a citizen in the United States. I mean, there used to be Asian people, but it was like Margaret Cho talking about being an Asian, or it was Kim's Convenience, which is a great, funny show, but it's about an Asian family. But this is like just a random person. The role could have been cast by anybody. Walking their dog, but it happens to be an Asian woman or an Asian man. And I'm like, oh, look. And the kids are like, Mom, like, you have to understand, this didn't used to be that way.
Right. It's like, Mom,
this is a big deal for me.
It's kind of like, you know, and I love you talk about that because this is exactly, I guess, what I'm feeling is that I think now that I'm getting some more like emotional distance, I think it's really healthy for us to acknowledge like there has been progress, you know, like it's kind of funny. So like, you know, I had mentioned Minari earlier, you know, my wife actually grew up in the same school with Stephen Young.
Oh,
he's from Michigan. Cool. So like when she sees that, it kind of represents like something very personal to her. And just seeing this wonderful movie, getting all these accolades, it made me think also about like some comments I remember from some of my friends in the Black community, like when they saw Black Panther and they saw Wakanda, like the world's most advanced civilization, you know. It's beautiful. It's full of this rich culture and history and technology. It's not like this kind of, you know, stereotypical, like tribal, like primal something.
Right.
People like have this like emotional reaction, you know, like,
Well,
whoa,
it's Afrofuturism, which is a whole
yeah,
genre. Like, I mean,
right,
that's why I when I found the books by Octavia Butler, and I was just because
yeah,
I love sci-fi, and I went into a
uh-huh.
a sci-fi bookstore, and I was like,
Yeah,
"Do you have any writings by a woman of color?" And they were like, "Have you
yeah,
read Octavia Butler?" And I was like, "No, I have not."
yeah,
And she died way before her time, so I am trying to I'm trying to ration her works because I know there are no more coming. But
yeah,
it's like people of color, specifically the Black and African community,
yeah,
were written out of
yeah,
of futuristic narratives.
yeah,
And so they're like, well, we're going to write ourselves in, you know.
yeah,
And so I think there's something similar to what we're describing with AAPI, that seeing
yeah,
a reflection of ourselves and seeing that
yeah,
we're not, we have emerged, or we don't discount the stories of our tradition and our history, but we're not bound by them either.
yeah,
There is a future filled with hope and redemption and
yeah.
promise that includes people who look like us.
Mhm.
You know, I think that
Yeah.
that's really powerful.
Yeah, I totally think so too. And like to see us not as like these token like side narratives, right? But like
Right.
in the center of the narrative, right? And I think that's I was also thinking about like Crazy Rich Asians, like,
Right.
I didn't see I saw it way after it came out and everyone's like, you gotta see it. And I was like, I don't know. But like I remember seeing it and just like, whoa, it's like
Yeah.
widescreen and all these
Right.
people look like me, and like
Right.
these
Well,
themes.
everyone in the theater, when I took my girls to see it, all
Yeah,
these Asian people were in the theater. And I was like, I didn't even know this many Asian people lived in my town, but they
right.
all came out of the woodwork for Crazy Rich
Yeah,
Asians.
it's so funny. I remember just thinking like, for instance, in my 20s, like I'd always go to these shows, like, and I go to like these indie, like underground kind of shows,
Mm-hmm.
and like, and always, I'm the only Asian guy there, easily.
Yeah.
And now we're in this place where I'm not, and it's just like, I guess I want to name this stuff because like I think it's helpful for me to like not lose hope because like I remember that week I just felt so
Yeah.
crushed in a way. But I think what we're kind of getting at is that even though we find hope, like there's still a lot of work to do.
Mm-hmm.
And just going back to what you said at the very beginning, which I really want to touch on, is I feel this tension too. So to tell you a bit, like as you know, like I record and produce music like outside of the church, and we're going to get into that in a bit. But I really kind of bristled against people kind of saying like, "Oh, he's that Asian guy who makes music," or "This is, you know,
Asian artist.
yeah, Asian artist," right? I really didn't, and that's a real big thing, like in LA, for instance, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when I was in SoCal, I didn't want to hang out with the Asian American artist community because I felt like I don't want to be like reinforcing this tokenism.
Mm-hmm.
But then, now that I'm a bit older, I'm part of a historic Japanese American church, right? I really got to think about this. And I imagine you have this too, right? Because you're on a national level in the American Baptist Church. Whether we like it or not, we represent people, right? We're a voice. So I'm finding this like really tough tension of like, I can't completely shun that either, right? Like, I think this is something that God's given to us, right? That we have to actually speak on behalf of others because that is what we're called to do. But at the same time, we kind of want to resist being like, oh, we need like a female Asian speaker, like I know someone, Lauren, right? Like I got this guy in like Seattle, like, but then it's like, I got to kind of take that in a way, but then also got to resist it. You know what I'm talking about? Like,
Right. Well, you want the representation.
Yeah.
So, you want the representation, but you're also wary of the tokenization. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the weird thing we're in, right?
That's another example of white privilege because communities of color have to think about that in this country.
Uh-huh.
In this country. Yeah.
Right.
Because we're not in the majority. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, combine us all and we are.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think that's a challenge. And I think, and at the same time, in the age of social media, identify those types of identifiers, Asian artists, things like that, help you get your message out as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know we're going to talk more about music, poetry that I write. Sometimes I will hashtag it, Asian poetry or Asian American poet.
Mm-hmm.
I have found so many other writers and artists via those types of identifiers, and others have found me, those who are interested in learning more and reading more and understanding more have found me that way too. So I struggle with the same thing, and I'm like, well, I'm just a poet, yeah, I happen to write about my Asian identity a lot, but sometimes I don't. And the other interesting thing is I wrote one poem about hiking because I'm a big hiker, and just looking at engagement, I mean, it's actually one of the favorite poems I've ever written, but it didn't get nearly the kind of engagement as the ones where I'm talking about bias, racism, right, gender, sexual, that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, okay, algorithms. Like, I mean, because, it's not controversial. It's like about hiking. It's about being a woman hiker and what that's like. And so
and I think that's a really great example of like, so that's where I'm kind of coming around is like, I think we always have to have this uneasy tension. Like we need both, right? We kind of need to actually just own it. Like we need to be that, because I can only imagine, like, let's say a young person, like a young female Asian person is thinking like, I want to be a voice for justice, right? Mm-hmm. And then she finds your stuff through a hashtag that you listed, like, Asian poetry or whatever. Like it might have changed her life, right? And she's like, you totally are what I want to be. And to know that you're out there going before me gives me the confidence to do what I do. So if you had not done that, right? If you had not given yourself that accessibility, that person wouldn't have found you, And I realized for myself, like if I'm not like a pastor engaging on the national level, what about other Asian pastors like after me? They won't find the strength or the courage to do it too. And
exactly.
So it's kind of like a bit of both, right? But while we're doing it, we also have to be very aware, like, how are we being invited? How are we coming to the table? Right. And we have to kind of resist like the old systems, like that we might be trying to be like shoved
right.
into.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it, put this in the context of ministry, like when we're able to and can, and it feels, it gives us life and joy to say yes. We show up at those tables and we say yes to the speaking engagement, and we say yes to playing, to being on the worship team or whatever for a national conference. We do these things recognizing that those who have come before us weren't always extended the invitation to do so.
Right.
But while we're there, we're careful, and we acknowledge some of the things that we're lifting up in this conversation.
Yeah.
We're careful to acknowledge the fact that now that I may have been given some power, how do I then pass that on to others? Mm-hmm. So how do I make sure that it's not just the Korean Americans and Chinese Americans and sometimes Japanese Americans who are being offered these positions or these opportunities within the American Baptist churches?
Yeah.
How do I make sure that as I say, yeah, sure, I'll serve on this committee for 2 terms, and then after this, I'm going to nominate 10 of my, Burmese sisters and brothers who I know to take on this role after me, right? Yeah. So we build an agenda of diversity, being anti-monolithic in how people see AAPI. We also come to that table saying things like, this is not, I don't represent everybody, right? So I mean, there's just different things that we can do once we're at the table. Yeah. But I do think I am like you, I recognize the fact that generations before us would have been like, are you kidding me? Like, you're getting invited to be at the table. How dare you even consider saying no?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because of tokenization. Just get your butt at the table. Yeah. Then you can mix stuff up. But get there first, right? Yeah. So it's kind of,
Which was actually needed at that time, right? I think of folks like, I mean, your dad's generation is definitely the pioneering ones, right? That just creating the awareness of the Asian Alliance nationally, like just even thinking of like an Asian Alliance, like what, I'm sure at the time, I'm thinking of like folks like, Paul Nagano, who is our senior pastor. Like, I think their task was different. It was just like, just show them you're alive kind of thing, right? But like for our generation, it's kind of like a bit of both. But I think we're kind of this interesting, it's almost more complicated because we're kind of like this mediating generation. Like we're right in the middle of it. Like we still have to get our foot in the door, but we know there's more to it,
Yeah. Well, and I think they were justice fighters too in that generation. I mean, certainly in a different, they may have done it differently than we would do it now. But I mean, I just think about, my dad serving on national staff with what was then called educational ministries for 20 years. And I remember him at the dinner table having conversations about of course now I'm like, what do you call it? I can't believe I can't think of it. Affirmative action. Thank you.
Yeah.
Affirmative action. I mean, ABC USA was talking about affirmative action, and he was at the table advocating for it, and then, I think about the stories that, Paul and Herb and others have passed down to us about solidarity around racial issues during the civil rights era, and, all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's, yeah,
I
each
think
generation is kind of called uniquely.
Yeah. Every generation has their own kind of unique calling.
Yeah.
And I was talking to someone about how that's why, like, we can't, it's like we waste a lot of energy, I guess, judging the other generations, when we actually really need to be thinking about, like, what are we called to in this time, in this age, right?
Yeah.
And also helping maybe, because we're both parents, just thinking, I think what our task is, just like I was thinking of your dad, like how to help our kids kind of discern what is their calling for their time and their place, right? And thinking like my daughter Eden will face different issues of diversity than I did, being like a Gen X, like a late Gen X guy. And she's like post Gen Z, whatever that is, right? What she's going to face. And I think that's important to, when we're talking about diversity, it's not like this same battle for everybody. I think we all have our part to play in it, and it's hard. I think we're all figuring it out, like what you described about that, the whole strategy of like inclusion and who you bring in, like that's really complicated, right? It's so fraught. Like we get it wrong all the time because like there's just too much to consider. But the best we can ask for is just like be open, have grace, and let's just keep it moving forward. If we make some missteps, just get up and do it better, but I think that's one key takeaway that I really want to kind of encourage my daughter too, is like, we're all figuring this out, and you've got to figure out like what God has called you to in your time, in your generation. And it's not going to be my calling. So
absolutely.
So, since I'm talking about parenting, I thought maybe I'll just kind of slip this into something I thought would be fascinating if you want to talk about it. I'm really interested in like your family in this time, because, you have a family of mixed ethnic origin, right? And so your children have a very like a much more complex like kind of identity than even mine, being a second generation Korean Canadian. And I was wondering, in times like this, like
I don't know, that Canadian is a little bit
Canadian
it's really complex.
I know. So I'm saying I'm complicated, but like there's other people complicated too. How about what's it been like for you? Like, what have been like the challenges and blessings of you being a parent in this time with like very like special family that you have?
Yeah, thanks. So I have 3 kids. A 15-year-old daughter who's a freshman in high school, a 13-year-old daughter who's a 7th grader, and a 10-year-old son who's a 4th grader. And my husband is ethnically half Jewish and then half sort of European, other ways, Northwestern European. And he, so my kids are, I mean, generally biracial, but in actuality multiracial, because I'm also got some Pacific Islander in me, so they also have that. So anyway, or I should say multiracial, biracial, multi-ethnic. How's that? But yeah, so it's been, I mean, I think it'd be unfair to not start with what it was like to just marry somebody who's not Chinese. And we went through it. We met in high school, so we were actually celebrating 20 years of marriage this summer. So we've been together a long time, 20 years of marriage, 30 years together. That's crazy. 25 years together. And I remember being in college, and I kind of had what I call my angry POC days, my angry person of color days in college. And I remember sending him all of these articles about what in Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack of White Privilege by Peggy McIntosh, and like all these other books and articles I wanted him to read about, like, I refuse to be your Miss Saigon, like all these things. And I really put him through it. And I was like, we need to have these conversations because I can't, you are a member of the white male patriarchy. And if we're going to have a future together, we need to deal with this stuff. And he was like totally along for the ride. And we did. And we continue to work through it all. So having kids, was an extension of that, obviously. And they each have their own stories, as can be expected. So they've all experienced some prejudice already, ignorance, people who just don't understand, or even maybe mean well, saying things like, oh, you don't even look Asian, as if that's some kind of thing to be happy about, versus other people who would say, oh, you look 100% Asian, as if that's something to be happy about. I mean, they have an identity, a racial identity that neither my husband or I have. So it's interesting to be parenting somebody where I can offer some guidance, but I can't really give advice born from firsthand experience.
Right.
I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and then, but one of the gifts that Daniel and I did want to give our kids was pride around their Asian heritage, and their Asian racial identity. Mm-hmm. So, because that's something that my parents gave to me, although I struggled like any kid would, and my children do as well. Mm-hmm. I did never wanted them to hear a different message from us as their parents. That would in any way lead them to think they should be shameful about it. So we do a lot more Asian-y things, like a lot more Chinese-y things in our family than I even did growing up. Like we never really celebrated Chinese New Year. My dad might have like brought some moon cakes in that his mother had given him, but like we didn't celebrate it. We celebrate it now with my parents. They come over, my mom cooks, I cook. Yeah. We celebrate it. When they were kids, I would do like a little presentation in their classrooms. I'd ask their teachers, can I come in and bring a treat and do a little Chinese New Year thing? So we celebrate in ways that I didn't even when I was growing up. And so my son is the only one who doesn't have a Chinese name in his given name. And he actually expressed to me recently that he wishes he did. Oh. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. So we're working on getting them like Chinese names, like characters. Uh-huh. But my oldest daughter has my mother's surname. My middle daughter has my father's surname, which is also mine, Ing, as their middles. Mm-hmm. But my son has his paternal grandmother's name. So that way, all four of the grandparents, my parents, my husband's parents, were represented by name somehow in our three kids.
I see.
So that's why we did it that way. Uh-huh. But as a result, my son has no Chinese name at all. And he's like, I want one. Yeah. And so on one hand, I'm like, I'm sorry, buddy. And on the other hand, I'm like, yes, like the fact that he wants that, right? Yeah, he's not wanting to erase, his Asian, identity.
That's really great. And, I was just thinking like, when you're talking about those conversations, like when you were just dating your husband, that, I mean, for that time, I think that's pretty progressive, and I think that was really modeling.
That was a long time ago.
Right.
We're talking not that long ago. We're talking 1997 was when I started. 1996 is when I started.
But I will say, like, that wasn't. I don't think there were a lot of people able to articulate that kind of stuff at that time, like compared to now. And I think the fact that you did that at the foundation of your relationship is like a really powerful model for your kids as well. Learning to find your voice and like finding out like what you want to take pride in, like all that stuff. Like, I think that's a real special gift. And I guess one last thing I was thinking about what you just said too is like, working in the Japanese American community, like, we're talking about these different generations. They're talking about how, the second and third generations, like, because of the incarceration, when they came out, they're kind of taught like, look, you got to keep your head down, be really American, or else you're going to get in trouble again, or we're going to get camps again, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So they became extremely Westernized. But it's interesting, after all these years, you're finding these, like the fourth or fifth generation now are like, we want to find out what it means to be Japanese, because like we want to reclaim it again. Yeah. But we had these like two generations where people were being silent. They're just trying to survive, like we were saying. Yeah. And it's interesting now that I'm seeing like we're slowly starting to get like a third generation Korean American. Like they don't have the baggage of the first, because like they were just trying to survive too. And now that they almost have the luxury to like find out like, hey, I like Korean pop, and like I want to find out about this stuff. And the fourth generation is
so
now
good
too. And it's almost like that's what's interesting about this new generation, right? Like that's growing up is like they don't have to be just survivors, you know.
Right.
And now they can be explorers, you know. And
Amen
I think
that's a great way of putting it.
And I think what you're doing, right, with like the Chinese New Year and stuff is like we finally have this like space, like mentally, emotionally to explore and to now impart like these beautiful traditions.
Well, Sam, did you ever see my post about my my shopping spree for my clothing?
Oh no, I haven't.
I promise it was not just an excuse to buy clothing, but I decided in this past year that I wasn't going to buy into the stigma that I was raised with, that Chinese equals cheap or Chinese equals gaudy or Chinese equals tacky. I mean, that was always kind of this sort of like, I don't know, cultural ethos I grew up in, where it was like Japanese, you know, the Japanese culture is always so tasteful and minimalist, and what Korean is tasteful, and Chinese is always gaudy and tacky and cheap, right? And anything that has a made in China sticker on it is not worth your money. I mean, imagine what that does to somebody growing up, right? Who's Chinese. And so anything, any motifs, any aesthetic that was overtly Chinese, I would just be like, ugh. And so I was like, you know what? No more. There's beauty in the patterns and the textiles and the whatever. And so I went on to Etsy and I found a couple of Asian independent, you know, clothing makers, and I love their style. And I've been ordering some clothes from them, and it takes forever for it to arrive because it comes from China. And they're these beautiful garments. And there's one dress in particular that it's actually my profile pic on all my social media that, you know, has like the Chinese buttons on it with the cross, you know, it's panel over here. And I love wearing it. Like I love going around town and being like, yeah, check out my obviously Chinese dress with my long black hair. Like I'm Chinese and I'm proud of it. And I find it to be beautiful. But that took me, I'm 43 this year, Sam. That took me a long time to get there. But like you said, how much sooner, perhaps prayerfully, will our kids get there?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's kind of the weird place we're in, right? We're kind of like learning to come to peace with our past, because like I think we're both like in this weird middle space, I guess, like between the survivors and the explorers. And it's like, how do we, I think the only way that we can really like empower the explorers is if like we can kind of come to peace with like where we are, right, to move the narrative forward. And so like, you know, doing like what you said, and like I have my own stuff being Korean as well that, you know, I want to embrace, but then also I don't also want to be confined by either, right? Because like I wasn't born in Korea, right? I'm not that either. And so it's kind of like that weird, like both and kind of thing, right? That we're in. So
are we the map makers? We're not the survivors, but we're the ones helping to kind of, you know, illustrate the lay of the land so that those explorers can just roll it up, stick it in their pack, and off they go to explore.
I wonder, because like, you know, I feel like I'm getting that role in ministry as well as a pastor. Like a lot of what I do is this kind of like this bridge in between kind of generations. And yeah, I think there's really something there. Oh man, my mind is racing. I'm gonna
let's write a song.
Yeah, let's write a song right now. No. Anyways, actually, I think this is a kind of a cool place to kind of like pause. There's so much in what you just said, so I'm kind of like, anyways, one thing though is interesting. I think because what we're talking about is so complicated, right? Like I feel like, especially like folks like you and I, like we're just talking about, we're holding so much together. I found that it's interesting that art has really been kind of like a lifeline for us, because, and my theory on this is that like the traditional ways of processing, like just through words, you know, or just writing, like it doesn't seem to encapsulate enough. Like it needs to almost be like this kind of spiritual, emotional, like guttural place. And I feel like that's what creativity is for me, it's like this other language, like a transcendent language, right, to process. And I found it interesting is that both of us, when all this stuff is going down, right, and we're processing all this complexity, right, we turn to art, right?
We're creating, yeah.
Yeah, right. I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's also, I've seen it in the Asian American communities, like there's a lot more art being generated right now because we're holding together a lot of really complicated feelings, as this podcast shows. Like we're going all over the place talking about stuff. And I feel like it's fitting that maybe we need a better, like a more, like a higher language, and maybe this is what art is. And I thought it'd be fun for us. What I've done here is like, I asked Lauren to read one of her poems, and I was going to just share a snippet of a song that I'm going to be releasing in a little bit. But yeah, so because like I thought this was a great example of like what we do to like kind of make sense of the world and get us through as we create. And so I thought maybe, did you want to like preface this poem before you share it with us?
Well, it touches on something that we've been talking about, which was, that sort of in between space, both generationally as well as, racial, ethnically. But no, I think I'll let it speak for itself. But I will say that it is intentionally untitled.
Right. Okay.
Okay. I hang in the balance, limbs in liminality. Wind chimes dance from the eaves of Chinatown storefronts in graceful mockery. I am us, but not them, they, but not we. They ring and they toll like the bag of foreign currency in my bottom drawer, loose change that will never find its way home.
That's really great. I mean, you don't have to, I don't want you to like unpack it, like, but if you need to, like,
a little bit.
Thoughts? Yeah. I mean, if you want to unpack or like your thoughts, like around it.
Yeah. Some poems, and I'm sure this is the same for your music. I know it is with mine as well, that, some are just ones that are worked on, revised, multiple drafts for weeks, months at a time. And this one was like, it just sort of came out. I think when I posted it, I called it a smattering of words on that just sort of emerged. But it started because I've been going through old boxes of my childhood things. My parents were like, we're not holding these 38 boxes of your old childhood items in our house anymore. You're a full grown adult with your own home. You're going to take them. So my dad has been bringing them over a few boxes at a time. And as I was going through my boxes, I was finding all these little baggies of foreign currency from the time that we went to Singapore when I was a kid, and the time we went, up to Canada, and the time that we went to, this and that. And so I was collecting all this loose change and realizing, I kept it all, but I thought, when am I ever going to use this? I mean, even if I travel back to these places, well, first of all, is that still their currency? Because if you go to the EU, some of it's not, is that still their currency? And if so, will I really remember to bring it back and whatever? So the thought was just that there's this currency that's literally in my bottom drawer that's never going to find its way back to its origin point. And I just felt like, there's that, for liminality, which is something that I know a lot of theologians love to talk about, but for those who may not be aware of it, it refers to that space in between. So we find ourselves now in a liminal season, right? Where the pandemic is not at its worst anymore, but we're not back to sort of pre-pandemic ways either. We're in this liminal in-between space. And then, an airport is an example of a physical liminal space where you're not really at your origin point, but you're not quite at your destination either. You're in this liminal space of the airport. And it refers to the threshold, I think, in Roman times that you would step over in a doorway. And so the root word of liminality comes from that. But, and I thought, gosh, liminality is a great way to describe what it is to be bicultural, where we walk around the United States of America as seen as a perpetual foreigner who never quite belongs here. But then I'm sure this has happened for you in some ways, but when I go back to China, I'm looked at as a foreigner. It's like very obvious that I'm American. Right. Even before I open my mouth, it's obvious. And so yeah, so just what that's like. And I mean, in Chinatown, San Francisco, I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time down there, and that's as close as I get, to kind of being in China around here. And when I'm there, it's the same thing. I mean, when I walk by the restaurants, the people, the employees standing outside hand me the coupon, just like they would any of the other white tourists who are walking by. When I walk into the store and they know I don't speak Chinese, I don't get the Chinatown price. I get the tourist price,
Right.
and all that kind of thing. So I just thought about, I mean, yeah. So that's where the image came from.
That's really powerful, because like there's so much more you can build on it, right? Because like we were just talking about these journeys, right, of generations. Like there's a liminal space in there that we're inhabiting.
That's right. That's right.
There's a liminal space in like how being like public figures, right? Public leaders, right? This liminal space of like between cultures, representing, but also like trying to be your own person. And I really love that poem, because I think there's so much to it, right? And then the weird liminality inside of our own selves, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful.
Neither here nor there. So
yeah. So I was saying earlier before the podcast is that, Lauren is very creative. So she does not just poems, but she's also like in a band, Whisper Fighters, right?
Whisper Fight.
Oh, Whisper Fight. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant that.
That's okay. Our hashtag, our handle is Whisper Fighters. So you're not wrong.
That's right. Whisper Fight. So, I mean, that's amazing. Like you're fronting that, playing the bass and like lead vocals, and you're doing poems. So there's a lot of things that you're involved in. And I feel like you're always doing something creative. Like your whole practice is like encouraging innovation, and creativity and ministry and leadership in the American Baptist Church. So I feel like it's all kind of drawing from the same well, but just finding a lot of different expressions.
Yeah, I think so.
Right?
So.
I mean, and then you like to cook, obviously, and doing other things. And so I think that's really exciting. And I think that's a sign of like being like an artist, is that it's not just a hobby, like, because like the hobby I think focuses on one particular expression, but I think if you're living a lifestyle of being a creative, right, like everything you do, you approach as a creative endeavor, right? And it's almost like you just kind of see where it goes. Like if it happens to go into music, fine, or if it goes into visual art, great, And I think, and that's where like it's like the creative spirit is leading you, and you're not just trying to shoehorn it into some kind of like tool or something. I think that's when it gets really exciting. Well, I wanted
to get to hear your song.
I want to share it kind of about mine. So I'm working on a song. I just recently actually finished a mix that I think is pretty close to finish, so it might come out as a single in a couple of months. I just released a new single recently.
Oh, good. I'm gonna
so I'm doing a series. I was kind of burnt out from my last album, because it just, to be creative in the pandemic year was really hard. And I determined like that year, like I'm going to make an album, and I just pushed it through, and I just felt like, ugh.
Great album, by the way. I remember I texted you. I was like, you didn't tell me there was a new album, but it was like a suggested for you on Spotify, because I follow you there. And so I was like listening to it. I think it was like you had just like published it. Like, I think you had just released it like 2 days before or something. I was like, why did you tell me? But it's fantastic.
It represents like 20 years of music. So I knew like I wanted it on that year to come out. But after the album came out, and because like I released on my birthday, which was also election day, so like it was just a lot of feelings on that day. So I was just kind of spent. And so I thought, what am I going to do next? And so what I decided to do is like to reach out to my artist friends and talk to them about, can you send me just some of your artwork? Because like I love all your art. Can you just send it to me and give me like a couple of word prompts? And I'm going to make a song from what I see in your art, like interacting with your art. And the one that I just released recently is like by May Kaitanen, who's like from like a Euro Taiwanese background. So she's mixed race. And so it's a lot of it's about what we're just talking about today. But this next one that I'm going to share with you, like just the chorus is, after the shootings, I just thought like, I need to say something, but I can't. So all I knew was like, I want to make some sound. Like that's the way I approached it. So I just literally made these 2 bars of like this phrase I had. And I had an idea of like what the image I was going to use from the artist, but I wasn't sure. But this was the sound and this was the chorus. And it was just me processing what was inside. I don't know, like, and I didn't even really know where it was going. So I'll share more about it after I play it.
How do you hold the light? How do you hold the light? How do you hold the light?
Yeah, so that's my song. And um, it was, so I guess I had this phrase, like, how do you hold the light? And I think at that time, it was like kind of like, it's kind of like a statement where it could be kind of dark. Because like, you can't hold light, right? And I think that's what I was struggling with is like, I think everyone wants me to be a light right now. Like I'm a pastor, I've got to find the right words.
Right.
And honestly, I'm exhausted. And I told you about like kind of racist incident with the student and just, it was tough. But then at the same time, it's kind of like, if you turn it around, it's also like, how can I be the light when things feel so dark, right? So it was like this honest question. And I felt like there's something about music where like you can do that. Because like every week I have to give a sermon where it's like, I'm trying to reveal the word and trying to help people go forward. But I think music is like a better place where you can hold questions and you don't have to answer them, you know?
That's right.
And I think creativity, like things like art, like poetry, like you don't have to lead them. Like you don't have to like drive home the conclusion or something, you know?
Right.
Like that's what I love about.
And as
Yeah, go
and
ahead.
as leaders who, like you were saying, a lot of people are always kind of waiting to hear what we might say or how we might guide them. When we create this art, it's from our own lived experience. So it's like we're not trying to say that it's the experience of everybody else or that it's exactly what we're trying to prescribe. It's not a prescription. It's a description of what we're experiencing. And I also feel like of course, art can be judged and critiqued, but I also feel like it's a judgment-free freedom there, because it's like, this is just what the Spirit did in me, and here it is. And it's not necessarily an invitation to like parse, our academic understanding, or is that really what the Bible says about it? And I have a theological on that. It's just like, no, this is just me in a file, in an audio file. This is just me on a piece of paper. Like, yeah.
And I feel like that's really where the Holy Spirit is kind of moving, right? Because it's interesting how it becomes very prophetic. Like one song I recorded like last year that was in that album, I recorded as a single, but I didn't know where I was going with it. It just started with like sounds and textures. That's usually where I start. And then I just kind of like begin to like think of words, and I don't even like know where it's going, but I just kind of trust it. That's a lot of like, I think a lot of what my creativity is about is trusting. And what's interesting is that I started kind of thinking about Ezekiel, this valley of the dry bones, and thinking of this idea of like, you need to go to the dead places or the broken places to find life, right? That's where the wind rises us, right? Like where the wind rises. And it was interesting, like that was actually a little before the death of George Floyd. And I remember when I saw that, I immediately knew like, this is what the song was for, and that it's like, we need to get to, we can't like shut out these riots and these dissenting voices anymore. We actually have to go there, if we're going to hear like how the Spirit's going to raise us up, right? And so it just felt so right to me. And it was like weird because this song came before all that, but it's almost like, it's going to make sense later. Right. And I feel like, a lot of your poems, for instance, you're talking about, right? Like as time goes on, you're like, oh, it totally makes sense why this came out, because you're kind of accessing this weird, like spiritual prophetic space, right?
Yeah, there was a poem that is probably the one that got the most exposure of mine called The Game Board. And I wrote it the day before the shootings in Georgia. But by the time it made some circulation, everyone assumed I wrote it in response. But I was like, I actually wrote this the day before. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's it's proof, it's evidence that the spirit is always moving in and among us and weaving things together in ways that we'll never fully understand.
Yeah. And, I think this is kind of like going full circle with everything we're talking about, like, because we are in that, like, I don't know, maybe we're that liminal generation, right? We're talking about where we have to navigate on this like razor thin line, right? And there's like great risk of like veering this way or that way. And I wonder, I'm not sure if anyone can really be like completely articulate, always right, always on point, and I don't know if it's like healthy to maybe suggest like that's what you must be, because it just adds another like oppression upon you.
That's right.
And I wonder, an important part for this liminal generation is to like really access this creative spirit, like that, because like there's something about, like you were saying, like art is like the safer place to process. And it transcends a lot of the boundaries that we see. It doesn't just like start and end with the church or outside of the church. Like, the spirit is a lot more free to go around wherever. And I wonder if like that's an important thing for us to think about, as we're going forward, is that it's not just about like crafting the right statements, but it's about like embodying this like creativity, that'll help us get through this all. So yeah, it's definitely helped for me, when
absolutely
I just don't know what to say. Like I've been diving into my music a lot, and I thought this was gonna be a down year for music, but like, I've already,
and then it ended up being I
have incredible. Like 6 or 7 songs on the way, and it's almost like,
oh my gosh,
I'm scared of like releasing too much, because like people will be like, why does he keep doing
this? No, I mean, Samuel J. Kim, well, if it helps, it's been a dry season for music for me. So I think, but poetry, but all the music vibes went your way, which is fantastic. But yeah, I think art is a lot. I hope this doesn't sound sacrilegious, but it's like scripture in a lot of ways. Like it invites interpretation, it invites interaction and engagement. I mean, it's just
that's exactly like Midrash and the Judaic tradition. Like that's exactly how they view scripture, right? As
exactly
creative endeavor, how we read the word. And so I think there's really something there. I realize like we've gone really long, but it's so good. I always enjoy talking with you, and I'm always like, oh boy, I want to talk about that next time. I'm always like filing all these things. There were definitely a couple of moments when we were talking, I was like, I almost like kind of lost my train of thought, because like I just got so stuck on that one thing you said. So always really fun to talk. There's always so much more to talk about, and wishing you well with your family, and thank you so much for just blessing us. Before I go though, I did want to mention you had a great interview with the Baptist Justice Coalition. Is that right?
Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Yep, no problem. BJC, Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, Religious Freedom.
And you were featured in an interview there, and I thought it was really great. So if you haven't been able to check that out, I strongly recommend you do that with Laura too. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome,
you're
Sam.
very busy. You're in demand. Everyone wants to talk to you. So I can't believe not a lot of people listen to this or watch this, but you give us time. So thank you.
It doesn't matter to me. It's always a blessing to have a conversation. And yes, thanks for having me again, Sam.
Thank you for, if you made it to the end, I am very impressed, and I applaud your endurance. So thank you for joining us. We'll have another episode very soon, and talk to you later.